My name is Sophia Reynolds. I am 34 years old. 4 years ago, my family blindsided me by demanding I put my career on hold to babysit my older sister's kids while she chased a new business venture, swearing it was just for a few months. That sacrifice cost me a major promotion and left me feeling invisible in my own family. Now, everything is colliding right here in James Whitaker's law office during this emergency family meeting about my father's recent health scare and the mounting debts from the family business, where my mother has just looked me dead in the eye and said the family expects me to empty my modest savings account to cover the shortfall because I have always been the one with the least responsibilities. My stomach drops as I see the expectant faces around the table, knowing this is the moment where I either break or finally test if they ever truly saw me. I steel myself, refusing to let them turn me into their safety net again. If you are watching this and you have ever felt like your own family only values you when your bank account or time can fix their problems, hit that like button and tell me in the comments what city you are in and whether you have ever been put in that same impossible spot. I read every single one, and it helps more than you know. I had been keeping my secret for 22 months by that point. Not a little white lie, but a full blown double life. I am a senior software architect at one of the largest digital marketing firms in the Southeast, pulling in $52,000 a month before taxes. I hold 2 patents on workflow automation tools I have spoken at regional tech conferences, and my stock options have turned into something that would make most accountants do a double take. But to my family, I was still the quiet, modest daughter who worked a regular office job and barely scraped by in her small apartment on the edge of suburban Charlotte. I never lied outright. When they asked what I did, I said I worked in tech supporting teams. They filled in the blanks themselves, assuming I was some low-level coordinator who could never afford more than my 12-year-old sedan and off-the-rack clothes. Why let them think that because my grandmother had taught me the same lesson she taught my mother before she passed when I was 27? True character shows when people believe you have nothing to offer. So I decided to test my own family the way she had always advised, living simply while I watched how they treated the daughter they thought was struggling. The emergency meeting at James Whitaker's office had been called 2 days after my father's mild heart episode. My mother had texted the whole group chat at 6 in the morning, demanding everyone drop everything and meet at the attorney's downtown Charlotte office by 10. No discussion, no asking if we could do it over video. Just the command. I drove my old sedan across town, still in the plain blouse and slacks I wore for my actual job, but with no designer touches that might give me away. When I walked into the conference room, the air already felt thick with expectation. My mother sat at the head of the polished table like she owned the place, her blonde hair perfectly set, even at this early hour. My father was next to her, looking paler than usual, but gripping his coffee cup with both hands. My older sister, Emily, sat on the other side, her husband David beside her, their 10-year-old son Tyler fidgeting in the chair between them. Aunt Karen, my mother's sister, had driven in from the next suburb over and was already flipping through a stack of papers James had provided. Cousin Michael leaned against the wall, scrolling his phone like this was just another family obligation. James Whitaker, the family attorney who had handled my grandmother's estate years ago, cleared his throat and started laying out the numbers. The family business, a small chain of 3 neighborhood cafes my parents had built over 25 years, was in real trouble. Expansion during the good years had left them with heavy loans, and now sales were down. Suppliers were threatening to cut them off, and my father's health meant he could not work the long hours anymore. My mother cut straight to the point before James could finish his sentence. Sophia, we need you to step up here. Your sister and David have the kids and the house to manage, and your father and I have poured everything into keeping those cafes open for the family. You have that little savings account from your office job. It is time to use it for something that actually matters. Her voice was calm, almost sweet, the way she always sounded right before the knife twisted. I felt the familiar sting in my chest, but I kept my face neutral. This was exactly the test I had been waiting for. My father shifted in his seat, and instead of the quiet discomfort I half expected, he suddenly leaned forward with surprising force, his voice louder than it had been in months. She is right, Sophia. We have all carried this family for years. Your sister has given us grandchildren, kept the cafes running on weekends when we could not. You chose the single life and your little tech job. Now is not the time to be selfish. Liquidate it, all of it. It is the least you can do after everything we have done for you. The words landed like a slap I was not prepared for. My father had never spoken to me that way in public. This sudden, sharp agreement felt worse than silence. It was as if he had been waiting for the right moment to finally pick a side, and the side was not mine. I opened my mouth, but Aunt Karen jumped in before I could respond, her tone dripping with that same false concern my mother loved to use. Honey, we all know you are not exactly rolling in it, but family helps family. Emily and David are already stretched thin with Tyler's school activities and the new cafe location they want to open. You do not have any of those responsibilities. Cousin Michael looked up from his phone just long enough to nod, adding, "Yeah, Soph, it is not like you are supporting anyone else. This is what family does." I sat there, feeling the walls of the conference room close in. This was not new. For years, my family had treated me as the reliable but unremarkable daughter, the one who could always be asked to drop everything because I did not have a husband or kids or a real life in their eyes. My older sister had always been the one who married, well, had the grandchild, and helped with the business even while my mother covered most of her expenses. I had watched it my whole life, but I had never called it out, not until now. The meeting dragged on for another 40 minutes of spreadsheets and guilt. My mother kept circling back to how much she and my father had sacrificed for both of us girls, how my grandmother would have wanted the family to stick together. Every time I tried to ask a practical question about the business numbers, she waved it off with a tight smile. "You would not understand the details, dear. Just trust us." My father, still riding that unexpected burst of energy, chimed in again with another shocking twist. "If you really cared about this family the way you say you do, you would not be questioning us. You would be writing the check." I felt my hands tremble under the table, but I held it together. This was the character test, playing out in real time. They thought I was the struggling daughter who owed them. They had no idea I could have written a check for the entire debt and still had plenty left. But I was not ready to reveal that yet. Not until I saw how far this would go. After the meeting finally ended, we all spilled out into the parking lot of the office building. My mother pulled me aside near my car, her grip on my arm a little too firm. "We will expect the transfer by the end of the week, Sophia. Do not make this harder than it has to be." My father stood a few feet away watching us with that new, hard expression on his face. He did not step in to soften it. Instead, he nodded once as if confirming her words. My older sister and David were already loading Tyler into their SUV, chatting about dinner plans like the whole thing had been settled. Aunt Karen gave me a pitying pat on the shoulder before climbing into her own car. Cousin Michael had already left without saying goodbye. I drove back to my modest apartment in the suburbs, the one with the secondhand furniture and the tiny kitchen that fit the image they had of me. My mind was racing. I had come to this meeting expecting pressure, but the way my father had turned on me so sharply, the way the whole family had lined up behind my mother without a single question, it felt like something deeper was at play. I needed more information. I needed to know if this was just desperation or if they had always seen me as the family ATM. That evening, my mother texted the group chat again, this time inviting everyone to a casual dinner at my parents' house the next night to discuss next steps. I knew it was another chance for them to pile on. I accepted still playing the modest daughter role, but I arrived early the following evening, parking my old sedan around the corner so I could slip in through the side door like I always did. The house smelled like the same pot roast my mother had made for every family crisis since I was a kid. Voices carried from the kitchen. I paused in the hallway just out of sight when I heard my mother's voice drop low. And once she hands over that savings, we can use it to keep the cafes afloat long enough for Emily and David to take over the day today. Sophia will not miss it. She has always been the independent one anyway. This way, she finally contributes something meaningful. My older sister laughed softly. Mom, you know she still thinks she is going to make it big in that tech job. It is cute, but we all know she is never going to have what it takes to really help this family the way Tyler needs. David and I have the future planned out. My father spoke next, and his tone was the most shocking of all. There was no hesitation, no quiet discomfort. Instead, he sounded almost relieved, like he had been holding this in for years. It is about time she learned her place. We have babied her long enough. If she pushes back, we tell her exactly what your grandmother always said. Family first, no matter what. Aunt Karen's voice joined in. Exactly. And if she tries to act like she is better than us, we will just remind her how much we sacrificed when her parents were gone and we all stepped in. Cousin Michael chuckled. She has always been the odd one out anyway. This will bring her back in line. I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart hammering so hard I was sure they could hear it. This was not just about the money. This was about control, about keeping me in the role they had assigned me since I was a child. The placeholder daughter. The one who could be guilted into fixing their mistakes while my older sister got the praise and the future. They had no idea who I really was or what I was capable of. But I was about to find out exactly how far they would go. I stepped into the kitchen with a calm smile, pretending I had not heard a word. My mother turned her expression, shifting instantly to that practiced warmth. There you are, Sophia. Perfect timing. We were just talking about how grateful we are that you are finally ready to help. The dinner began like any other family gathering, but the tension under the surface was electric. Every bite of food felt like it carried an expectation. I waited, listening, gathering more pieces while they talked around me. By the time dessert arrived, I had heard enough to know the plan was bigger than one savings account. They wanted me to keep contributing indefinitely, maybe even quit my job eventually to help run the cafes full time, so my older sister could focus on the expansion they had already promised Tyler would inherit one day. My father caught my eye across the table at one point and gave me that same firm nod from the lawyer's office, the one that said he was all in on this new version of himself. It was the most frustrating, shocking thing I had ever seen from him. No awkward laugh, no changing the subject, just cold, unexpected alignment with my mother that left me reeling. I left that night with my secret still intact, but the resolve in my chest had hardened into something sharp. I would play along a little longer. I would let them think I was the same modest daughter they could push around. But I was already making calls to old contacts for my real career, quietly digging into the business finances they thought I could not understand. The test had begun, and so far my family was failing in ways I never expected. The next morning, my phone would not stop buzzing before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. My mother had already sent 3 texts reminding me about the savings transfer deadline she had set herself. Each one carried that familiar mix of sweetness and steel, the way she always framed her demands as loving requests. I replied with short messages that sounded cooperative while my mind raced ahead. I knew I needed real answers before I made any move, so I reached out to Laura Bennett, a former mentor from my early days in software architecture, who now ran her own discreet financial consulting firm in Raleigh. Laura was one of the only people outside my tight circle who understood the real scope of my career, and she agreed to pull some public filings and run a quiet analysis on the cafe chain without asking too many questions. 2 days later, Laura called me during my lunch break at the office. Her voice was crisp and professional as she laid out what she had found. The cafes were not just struggling with normal debt from the 25 years of expansion my parents had described. My older sister and her husband had quietly pulled tens of thousands of dollars in personal draws over the last 11 months, labeling them as vague consulting fees and family advances. The money had gone toward private school tuition for my nephew, a new luxury SUV, and even a family vacation they had posted about on social media as a simple weekend getaway. Laura paused before adding the sharpest part. It looks like they structured it to stay under the radar, but any competent accountant would spot the pattern. This is not desperation, Sophia. This is entitlement disguised as family support. I sat in my car in the parking lot after the call, staring at the dashboard while the weight of it settled. My hands shook slightly as I saved the documents Laura emailed. This was not the picture my mother had painted in the lawyer's office. This was deliberate. I was still turning it over in my mind when my father called me that same evening. His voice came through the phone low and controlled, nothing like the forceful tone he had used in the conference room. There was no hesitation, no awkward deflection. Instead, he delivered a cold, precise ultimatum that hit harder than any raised voice could have. Sophia, your mother is devastated by how slowly you are dragging your feet on this. If you cannot put the family first, right now, perhaps we need to update the business documents to reflect who is truly committed here. You have always acted like you were too good for the life we built. Prove me wrong or step aside for good. The line went quiet after that, leaving me stunned in the silence of my apartment. This was not the father who used to let my mother lead every conversation. This was someone who had been carrying quiet resentment for years and had finally chosen this moment to let it show. I barely slept that night. The following afternoon, my mother called again, her tone shifting from sweet to cutting in the space of one sentence. She started with the usual reminder about the transfer, but then pivoted sharply. You know, Sophia, it is interesting how you always find time for that little tech job of yours, but suddenly cannot find any for the family that actually raised you. Your older sister manages the cafes on weekends while handling a child and a husband. What exactly is so important in your world that you cannot contribute one single time? The jab landed exactly where she meant it to, reminding me once again that in their eyes, I was the daughter who had chosen herself over everyone else. I kept my voice even and told her I was looking into options, but inside I felt the anger building like a slow burn. By the weekend, my mother had scheduled a family lunch at their house to finalize everything. I arrived still dressed in the plain work clothes that fit the image they had of me carrying the modest purse I had used for years. My older sister was already there with her husband and my nephew, chatting about weekend plans as if the financial crisis was just background noise. My aunt and cousin joined shortly after, filling the dining room with the same expectant energy from the lawyer's office. My mother waited until we were all seated with plates of food before she turned to me with that practiced smile. Sophia, we have been patient, but the suppliers are threatening to cut us off next week. Your savings is the only quick solution here. Do not make us beg. It is embarrassing for everyone. My older sister leaned in with a sarcastic edge that felt calculated. Yeah, it is not like you have any real responsibilities, no kids, no mortgage, just your little office life. This is the least you can do after everything my parents have done for both of us. My nephew looked up from his plate at that moment, and my older sister used even that to twist the knife. Tyler, tell Aunt Sophia how important the cafes are so you can keep going to your school. The boy repeated the words like a script, and the table nodded in approval. My father had been quiet through most of it, but when I tried to ask one practical question about the exact amount needed and whether they had explored other loans, he suddenly pushed his chair back with a loud scrape and left the room without saying anything. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. A few minutes later, he returned, pulled me aside in the hallway, and spoke in that same low, controlled voice from the phone call. His eyes locked on mine with a frustration that shocked me all over again. I never thought I would have to explain basic loyalty to my own daughter. Your grandmother left us instructions about keeping the family together, and you are testing every limit we have. If you walk away from this, you walk away from all of us. The threat was quiet but absolute, and it left me reeling because it came from the one person I had always counted on to stay neutral. I made it through the rest of the lunch by nodding and giving noncommittal answers, but inside my mind was spinning with the evidence Laura had given me and the new layers of pressure piling on. As everyone was clearing the table, my phone buzzed with a message from James Whitaker, the family attorney. It was short and urgent. I have reviewed additional documents related to your grandmother's estate that your parents never disclosed. There is a clause that directly affects any financial contributions from you. Call me immediately. This changes the entire situation. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. What had they been hiding all this time? The lunch ended with my mother hugging me tightly and whispering one last jab in my ear. Do not let us down, Sophia. We are all watching. I called James the moment I walked through my apartment door, and his voice on the line was grave as he explained the clause from my grandmother's estate that my parents had never disclosed to any of us. It turned out the will contained a specific provision: any financial contribution from a grandchild toward the family business would automatically grant that person a silent partnership stake with limited but binding decision rights. My parents had known about it for years and structured their plea so that my savings transfer would lock me into the cafes, indefinitely giving them control over my time and future while shielding themselves from full liability if things went south. James warned me the documents they had shown at the emergency meeting were incomplete on purpose. This changes everything, he said. If you send the money, you are signing away your autonomy in ways they have not told you. The revelation hit like a physical blow. I spent the next 2 days in a fog at work, pretending everything was normal while I reviewed the documents Laura had sent and cross-checked them against what James shared. My older sister had known too. Her name appeared on several side memos as a co-signer on the business expansions, and the personal draws she and her husband had taken were larger than Laura had first estimated. It was not just entitlement. It was a calculated system designed to keep me as the quiet contributor who asked no questions. The anger that had been building since the lawyer's office now mixed with a deep aching sadness because my father had been the one to push hardest on the phone and in the hallway. He had chosen this path, deliberately turning on me in a way that felt completely new and utterly final. I knew I could not delay any longer. My mother had already scheduled another family gathering for that evening at their house, framing it as a casual update, but texting me separately that the suppliers had set a hard deadline. I arrived early again, still in my plain work clothes, but this time I carried a printed folder with the key pages from the will and the financial analysis. The house smelled of the same pot roast, but the air felt charged with the kind of tension that made my stomach twist. My mother greeted me at the door with her usual tight smile, pulling me into the living room where everyone was already waiting. My father sat in his favorite chair, looking steadier than he had in weeks, his expression calm but unyielding. My older sister and her husband were on the couch with my nephew between them, and Aunt Karen and Cousin Michael had claimed spots at the dining table. Before anyone could launch into the usual script, I spoke first, keeping my voice steady. I have looked into the numbers like you asked, but there is something you all need to see. I handed the folder to my mother, watching her face as she flipped through the pages. Her expression shifted from practiced warmth to something colder when she reached the will clause. My older sister leaned over to look, and her sarcastic laugh cut through the room like a knife. Oh, please, Sophia, you are really going to bring up old paperwork now. We are talking about keeping the cafes open for Tyler's future, not some technicality from years ago. My mother closed the folder with a snap and set it aside, her eyes locking on mine with that familiar venomous sweetness. You know, it is funny how you suddenly become an expert on family matters when it suits you. We have carried this business through every hard year while you played at your little tech job. This contribution is not optional, dear. It is what family does. My father stood then, and instead of the quiet support I once hoped for, he delivered another shocking reaction that left me reeling. He crossed the room in 2 steps, his voice low but sharp as he looked me straight in the eye. I have watched you hold yourself apart from us for too long, Sophia. Your grandmother would be ashamed of how you are using that clause as an excuse. Sign the transfer tonight, or we will have James draw up papers that make it clear you chose yourself over this family. The words landed with a finality that stunned me. This was not discomfort or deflection. This was my father choosing sides openly and without hesitation, aligning with my mother in a way that felt like he had been waiting years to do it. My aunt nodded vigorously, adding her own jab. We all stepped up when your grandmother passed. Now it is your turn to step up without the drama. The room erupted into overlapping voices, my older sister piling on about how I had always been the one who thought she was too good for the real work, my nephew repeating phrases they had clearly coached him to say. I felt the walls closing in the same way they had in the lawyer's office, but heavier now with the knowledge of the hidden clause. I could have revealed my full income right there. I could have shown them the patents and the stock options and walked out with my head high. But as I stood there listening to their chorus of demands, something inside me cracked. If I exposed everything now, they would twist it into proof that I had been hiding money from them all along, that I owed them even more. If I refused outright, they would cut me off completely and paint me as the selfish daughter who abandoned her family in their time of need. Either choice cost me something I could never get back. In the end, I made the painful choice. I wrote the transfer for a portion of what they asked, enough to buy time, but not the full amount that would trigger the full partnership clause. I told them it was all I could manage from my savings and that I would not be quitting my job or taking on any operational role. My mother accepted the confirmation on her phone with a curt nod, but her eyes told me it was not enough. My father watched me sign the digital form without a word of thanks, his face showing only that same cold resolve. My older sister smirked and said under her breath that at least it was a start. The gathering ended with awkward goodbyes and no hugs. I drove home in silence, the weight of what I had just done settling like lead in my chest. The next few weeks brought the irreversible consequences I had feared. My mother texted daily with new requests disguised as family updates, each one chipping away at the boundary I had tried to set. My older sister posted photos on social media of the cafes looking revived, tagging the whole family, but never mentioning my contribution. My father called once to say the business was stabilizing, but that they expected more from me soon because the clause now gave them leverage to ask. Laura Bennett checked in and confirmed what I already suspected. They are using the partnership stake to pressure you legally if you push back too hard. James Whitaker sent a follow-up note advising me to consult my own attorney because the documents I had signed tied me to future obligations I could not easily escape. I felt the isolation settle in slowly at first, then all at once. Calls from my aunt and cousin stopped. Family group chats grew quiet whenever I tried to contribute anything unrelated to the cafes. I chose myself by refusing to quit my job or move back into the family orbit, but the cost was everything I had once called home. There were no dramatic revenge moments, no public takedown, no satisfying collapse of their plans. My family remained exactly as they had always been, stronger in their certainty that I owed them and that I would eventually bend further. I kept my career, my modest apartment, and the quiet life I had built in secret. But I lost the last threads of the family connection I had still hoped might be salvageable. Some nights I sit by the window with my tea and wonder if my grandmother would have approved of the choice I made, or if she would have seen it as another kind of failure. The truth I learned through all of this is that character tests do not always end with clear winners. Sometimes the people you test reveal themselves so completely that the only real victory is walking away with your self-respect intact, even if it leaves you standing alone. My family had shown me who they were when they thought I had nothing left to give, and I had shown myself what I was willing to lose to stop being their safety net. Thank you for listening to my story. It still hurts to tell, but sharing it feels like the first step toward carrying less of it alone. If you have ever had to make a painful choice that cost you your family ties just to protect your own future, drop a comment below and let me know how you moved forward. I read every single one, and knowing I am not the only one makes the weight feel a little lighter.